Romania has really good food. Everything from sarmale, shawarma. A very traditional holiday food is called sarmale. And so what they do is they have either pickled or boiled cabbage that they then use to wrap, well, they call them cabbage rolls, I think, as a translation in English. And they put meat and rice and lots of different flavorings in there, roll it up in the cabbage, and then boil it, whether it be in chicken broth or tomato sauce, all sorts of different stuff. And then you just take that out and put some sour cream on top, and it is so good. That is like some of the best thing. You have some bread with that, and it's amazing. Another one of my favorite things is how very frequent bread is. Like, so a leu is worth about 30 cents, 30 American cents, and you could buy a loaf of bread for a leu basically anywhere on the street. You see all these different vendors of bread all the time. I think it was really good. Like, it's better than it's kind of like the French bread you'd see here, but it's so much better. At least my opinion. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me. And so we get a loaf of bread and get something called Zakuska, which is an eggplant and tomato and all sorts of different stuff all mixed into this spread that you'd put on the bread, and it was delicious. Shawarma is another good thing. It's actually, I believe, a Turkish food, but it's kind of like, what's the best? A gyro, but it has fries in it and a special sauce and everything that sets it apart. Those are always good. You just grab those on the go when you're going to grab food. That one's if you're hungry but don't have a lot of time to eat, you grab a nice shawarma and it's so good. And then probably my favorite snack to have there were the pretzels, kovric. And they're everywhere, super cheap, really good. And they'd have everything from salt and sesame seed on the top to chocolate filled. There are a lot of foods that some people will say are gross and kind of weird. But I think it's just because of the ingredients they use. Because they have what's called ciorba de borta. I never had it personally, actually. But it's actually stomach soup. And they have the stomach of a cow. But I've actually heard a lot of people say that it's really good. And there are just a lot of different things that if you just got to go try it. If it's offered to you, you try it. If you don't feel daring enough to order at a restaurant, just wait till someone gives it to you. You might have that occasionally. But always have some pretty good desserts too. Little prăjitură, just like tarts and different things. I didn't realize how cheap it was until I came back and started looking for like married housing and that kind of thing. But it actually is really cheap there. You could go for, I had to do a decent amount of apartment hunting just because we moved around in the places that I was at. But I think most places would go for about a couple €100, which is a couple $100, for apartments. And that's how they'd pay for apartments, is with euros. Which is fair, about 1-to-1 rate for American dollars. And then food was actually, everything else was really cheap. And so with transportation, a bus pass would probably go for about what would be $30 for the whole month, so about 100 lei. A good lunch, as I was saying earlier, the shawarma, that one costs about 10 lei, so that's $3 for a wrap, I guess. And it's generally really large and very filling, so that'll get you a full meal. Or you'll go to a restaurant and get meniul zile, so the special of the day, I guess, is what it would be. And that would probably cost around 10 lei, 10 to 15, which is about $3 to $5. So really good prices for really good food. So my first city was Ploiești, and everyone would tell me that it's not exactly the best looking of cities. If you know anything about history, it was bombed during World War II, I believe, because it was a giant oil field. Like, you can walk in there, and if you know what oil smells like, I don't. I've heard that it smells like that, and it smells like oil. And it still is. I'm not sure if the refineries or the drilling is still happening there, but that's part of it. And it's not the best looking city, but it is one of my favorites. It was a pretty big, a nice city. It was very industrialized with communist blocks, is what we call them blocks. They're just giant cement buildings that would be anywhere from 3 floors to, I'd say, 10 or so. And then you just stuff as many different apartments as you can into one of these blocks. Which is kind of interesting if you could get into one, because they have like a little passcode on the side that you either put the pin in, or you have a key, or you intercom in. But public transit was a big thing there. There's all sorts of buses, tons of buses, whether they be the electric ones or normal gas ones. There's a very good and well-developed bus system there. You just get an abonnement, a monthly pass basically, to get you to travel throughout the whole city. Well, that's really cool. And then also, if you need to get somewhere really quick, you can take a taxi. And taxis are actually really cheap. It's like a leo, so about 30 cents per kilometer. So it doesn't come to too much, and you can get pretty far pretty quick, especially in the city, which is so compact. A lot of people are on the buses, a lot of people are on the streets. They walk everywhere, they take the buses, and it's really cool to see them out in the environment. There are a lot of great parks there too. Parks where people just hanging out, playing frisbee, whatever it may be, sitting on a bench, reading, whatever it may be. A lot of their culture is in the Orthodox religion, which somehow survived through communism. I think it was kind of like the communist leaders kind of overlooked orthodoxy still existing. And you see a lot of different things of that just bred into their culture. They have things like the 40-day fast where they'd not eat meat for 40 days, basically a vegan diet for 40 days. And all sorts of, like, every holiday has something great. They have so many holidays there. There's a Saint's Day for basically every saint you could name under the sun. It's kind of fun also. When you go by a church, they'll always cross themselves. When someone gives you something to eat, you eat it all. Because it's, I don't know, like I've always been one to eat, so I haven't ever left anything left over. But they will keep giving you more. It's like, oh, we've got more. Take some more sadamali or whatever it may be. And the food is like 99% of the time really, really good. And so I think the only thing is make sure to eat their food. Try it at least before you say that you don't like it. Because I had an opportunity to try something that didn't look too great. And probably wasn't my favorite thing to eat, but I was definitely glad that I'd tried it afterwards. So for holidays, actually, I can think of their 2 largest ones are Christmas and Easter, as the Christian religion would denote. For Christmas, they spend so much time together as a family. It's really awesome. And Easter time, the night before Easter, everyone gathers around the churches, and they have a mass or a service together in which they light this candle, which is, I believe the tradition is that it's fire from heaven coming down on Easter. And so the priest or the head of the church would light a candle and then pass it to everyone, and everyone would pass their candle out. And if you made it home with your candle still lit, all of your sins would be forgiven, is how tradition denotes. But they have all these different little traditions that they'll stick with. One of my favorite things is obviously the people. They are very blunt and very stubborn. And so I had some person, one random day, so I met him my first week in country, and then I met him like 6 months later. And he told me straight up, wow, you've lost a lot of weight. You were so fat back then. And so that caught me off guard. Like, it wasn't offensive to me, but if you're fat, they'll call you fat. If you have something on your face, they will tell you that. Whatever it is, they'll let you know. And that's so fun about them. And they are very stubborn. But I think stubborn in a very good way, because you can see a lot of their faithfulness in what they do. And if they set their mind to something, they will keep through with it. Also, if you get to know them pretty well, they'll be very loyal to you. if you can get into their friend zone, which can be pretty difficult sometimes, because communism did do a lot to harden them, I feel, to not trust people sometimes. But once you get into their friendship zone, they will trust you forever and they will love you. So Romanian is actually a Latin language, so one of the Romance languages. And from what I've heard is that it's the closest to Latin of them all. I've found that it's very close to Italian. I can understand a decent amount of Spanish, a little bit of Portuguese, and no French. But if it's reading, I can kind of understand reading French. So they're all kind of similar in that regard. A beautiful language, one of my favorites. And it does have some Russian influences to it, because, you know, the word for yes is da, instead of what you see in like Spanish as si, or French oui. So there are differences and Russian influences to it. I've been told my accent is actually fairly Russian for some reason. I never understood that one. But it is a fairly difficult language, I would say. But if you put the time into it, it's a lot of very the rules are stuck to pretty well. So like the grammar rules that they teach you in the MTC and wherever you learn in grammar books, those will stick, like they're most of the time fairly accurate, as opposed to English, which has the weirdest of all conjugations and whatever. So once you get the rules down, it's a decent enough language. I do consider it probably the most beautiful language, but I'm probably biased in that regard. So there are a couple of different letters that are in the alphabet, but most of them make a noise that's fairly common to what we know. I have an S with a squiggly under it, which makes a sh noise, and then a T with a squiggly under it, which is a ts noise. But then there's also, what they have is, we'd call them A-hats and I-hats. And they make a sound that we can't really compare to in English. It's kind of like, they always compare it in the MTC as if being punched in the stomach. The noise that you'd make from that, that's the noise that it makes. So it's a noise right in the back of your throat. And a lot of times you can't tell the difference if you're not trained to it. So it just sounds like another one of the vowels that's close to it. And so it's kind of interesting to hear the differences and people trying to pronounce it when they don't know what it actually sounds like. Sound can actually be very difficult until you get used to it. Definitely study the grammar. And listen to people to work on your accent. I feel like those two things are probably the best to do. Because the grammar helped me out so much. I was spending a lot of time studying, and I was able to see how it worked out. And though I may not have used that grammar per se, if I heard it, I knew what they were referring to. Talking to people will help you improve how well you speak, how well you understand, and make it so you sound more like a Romanian. The Russians, it was a communist country under the Soviet Union, and so I believe everyone was forced to learn Russian, or I don't know about forced, but they learned Russian in the school system during communist times. But there aren't a ton of Russians in Romania, to my knowledge anyways. I never saw too many, if any, at all. And the thing is, the Romanians stuck very well to their language. They kept the language as pure as they could and actually did a really good job. There is influence, Russian influence, in a little bit in the language, like da and a couple of other random words that I can't think of. But Moldova, on the other hand, is very Russian influenced. Because I believe everyone speaks, well, most everyone speaks Russian, and a lot of people speak Romanian there, depending upon where you live. Even to the extent that there's a city that the people don't know how to read the Latin alphabet, but don't speak Russian too well. So they have a Cyrillic Bible in Romanian. I feel like there aren't too many tensions with Russia. I don't know. The older people will often say, oh, we should still have communism. The younger people are like, we need to do something better than that. And so, but I don't feel like there's too much tension in that regard. There are a lot of dogs, lots of stray dogs. And they're not a problem most of the time. They're generally pretty calm, just sitting on the grass, just waiting around, scavenging food. But the stray dogs are actually very nice most of the time. I haven't had problems with them. I've heard a couple of stories, like very few and rare stories about anything with knives. I've heard once or twice that someone got a knife pulled on them, but they weren't going to do anything with it anyways. It was to frighten them. And so it's fairly safe. I don't think I can think of, I mean, I don't know if my perspective is exactly the best. I was fairly oblivious to everything that was going on around me, but I do feel like it was a pretty safe place to be. A little bit dark and beaten down from communism, but as long as you don't mess with the wrong people, then you're generally pretty safe in there. Try and stay to the more populated areas during the nighttime. It can get kind of sketchy in some places. There are, I hate to say it this way, but there are gypsy villages, and there are a lot of what people would call gypsies that are great, outstanding citizens, and then there are also ones that just don't do a ton. And so when I say that, that's what I'm referring to with the gypsies. That their situation has just been hard and they never even learned to read because of their growth, which causes them to get married at a young age and then not have their kids learn to read, and it's just a bad cycle. But trying to avoid those places at night, the places with a lot of the sketchy gypsies, but I feel like those are kind of areas you kind of should realize that it's kind of a bad place to be in. But during the nighttime or whenever it's dark, stay where it's well lit and you should be really fine.